Welcome everyone to another episode of JMMA Monday Audio. It's certainly been a while, but we're back. This week's episode, we will be discussing RIZIN 38 along with a few of the upcoming fights in the promotion's schedule. To do this, we have invited back Christopher Aguiar of AguiarMMA.com. For anyone who isn't aware, Christopher is an experienced combat sports writer that has closely followed the JMMA scene. He has recently written a piece on RIZIN talent Park Si-woo, which we'll certainly get into later. Christopher, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me back, man. How are you?
I'm doing great. And, for a while, there hasn't been this podcast because there was a bit of a lull and stuff to talk about. But there's certainly no shortage of topics this week. So I'm excited to get into all these topics with you.
Yeah, me too. Let's do it.
So, we can't start with any topic other than RIZIN 38, which was just it was just last weekend. This was easily one of the biggest shows of the year for the promotion. If we're talking strictly off of popularity and how much notoriety it got, it is going to be the biggest show of the year, even after New Year's Eve happens, and that's only because Floyd Mayweather was on it. But besides that, there is a lot to talk about on the show. The Super Atomweight Grand Prix happened. We had the return of Hiromasa Ogikubo, and we also had the return of Kyoji Horiguchi in the main event. But before we get to all that, I guess we sort of have to talk about the Floyd Mayweather whole scenario to start. So for anyone who isn't aware, Floyd Mayweather fought in a 3-round exhibition boxing match against Mikuru Asakura, and he picked up a second round finish win. And this was the second time we've seen Mayweather in RIZIN. He recently appeared to face Tenshin Nasukawa in late 2018. So, we've seen the song and dance before, and we've seen him win in the RIZIN ring before. And everything about this whole sort of scene when he arrives is super unique to RIZIN because he's such a huge deal, and his tree is such a huge deal. So I guess just to start, Christopher, what did you make of all this?
It was a fight, and it happened. I don't know. It's really strange with the whole Mayweather stuff. I don't know what RIZIN gain out of it, in the sense of, hey, here's the superstar that we have in Japan. Let's let him die to the hands of Floyd Mayweather. It's really strange. In fairness to Mikuru, it was a lot more competitive than the Tenshin fight was, until Mayweather basically got hit a bit more than he probably would have liked to, and then decided to knock Mikuru out. I think it was as simple as that. The whole song and dance thing, I personally, I don't get the whole Mayweather in Japan thing. I don't know if it generates that much buzz in Japan. Like, maybe that's just me not understanding how things work when they bring Floyd over, but it makes no sense to me. I don't know what they gain out of, here's Mikuru, here's this cool dude who is from an underground street fighting kind of thing, and he's fought for some belts, and let's let him die. I don't get it. I really don't understand.
Yeah, it's certainly weird to me the first time it happened, and it's still weird to me the second time it happened this time around. Personally, though, I would say sort of not in defense of this, because I still think it's weird, but just sort of talking about this one and comparing it to the Tenshin fight, this one makes more sense to me in a way, because the Tenshin fight, this was Tenshin, who is this super skilled kickboxer. He's valued for his athletic skills, and really that's what he brings to the table. But someone like Mikuru, he's this sort of controversial YouTuber, influencer, celebrity, and I just don't think him looking amazing in this fight was necessarily a huge deal. Like, I think that the fact that he lost this fight isn't necessarily a hit to his stock, because he is one of those, and I wrote about this briefly in my column last week, that I said he is one of those people who is very much in the industry of good or bad PR, all really wrapping around to being good PR for him.
Yeah.
But in the end, yeah, I thought this was a little weird. It's, to me, something about this having Mayweather and RIZIN is always so weird to me. Like, it's a little surreal to see him there. It's a little surreal to see the amount of mainstream media attention that these events get. Like, you see ESPN covering it, you see like newspapers covering it. It's a little bizarre. But overall, I just think it's weird. I want to ask you, what did you think about this whole flower thing that happened? Um,
Okay.
you know, so for anyone who didn't watch, there was a moment before the Mayweather fight. This happens before almost every fight on a RIZIN card where each fighter is given flowers, just as like a ceremonial thing, and usually it's a sponsor or something of that nature. And the person who was giving Mayweather his flowers decided to sort of hijack the show a little, or not hijack the show, but hijack the spotlight for a second. And instead of handing the flowers to Mayweather like you're supposed to do, he dramatically dropped the flowers on the floor in front of him. So this, to my surprise, quite honestly, became a massive deal. Um, RIZIN CEO Nobuyuki Sakakibara spoke at the intermission or at a break in the show and apologized for this and said he was absolutely disgraced. And then 2 days ago, as of recording this, just this week, he apologized again at a press conference, this time getting on the ground and, doing the whole bow for forgiveness and all that. This is clearly being treated as a huge deal. What do you make of this? Because I find this whole thing bizarre.
I think I get it from a cultural standpoint. I know the whole, giving the fighter the flowers, the whole ceremonial aspect to it. I thought it was hilarious. I don't know what was funnier, if it was Sakakibara apologizing profusely for longer than the fight lasted, or if it was the actual dropping of the flowers. It was really strange to me. The outrage or the uproar I saw from the Japanese public, that didn't really surprise me, just because I know how much like honor and the ceremonial stuff is taken really seriously in Japan in terms of MMA. I love though seeing kind of like the overseas side of things, like us guys, because we all kind of found it hilarious. It was brilliant from my perspective, to be honest.
Yeah, and I guess my personal thing is that I totally understand like the cultural aspect of it and all that, but I just feel like if you get outraged to a certain extent about this, you are almost validating what the person did.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like
Yeah,
it almost like gives more reason for why someone would do something like that, that would generate controversy. And also I just think that Mayweather didn't seem to really care. Like he was in his zone. He didn't When it happened, he just seemed to sort of shrug it off.
I like that he picked the flowers up. I didn't expect him. I thought there was going to be the whole like, oh, should I pick it up? Should I not? The fact that he actually picked it up was really bizarre to me, because I thought his ego would stop him from kind of. But maybe he didn't
I just
understand
think
what
it
was
was
going
I
on.
just think it was one of those things where he was minutes away from fighting someone, so
Yeah,
he couldn't get out of that zone. So he's not
fair.
going to think about something like that. He's not going to let someone annoy him. So yeah, the whole Mayweather thing, it was very weird. The way it sounded afterward is that he's going to be back sometime next year. I mean, obviously we don't know if that's true or not, but
Who the hell does he fight?
that's exactly what I was thinking. Oh my God. Yeah. So what's funny is he fought in RIZIN in 2018, and then he came back 4 years later, and that was mostly because of the pandemic, but 4 years later, and he fought Mikuru Asakura. And as it stands 4 years later, it seems like Mikuru is really the only person he could have faced.
Yeah,
So if he's going to return a year later, I just don't know anyone in the promotion who would be that next person they can match up against him. And I don't know if that's a testament to how the promotion is, has lost a lot of talent over the past few years and really needs to get that new leading star, or if it's just testament to maybe there's no one that we should give Mayweather next.
well, I think it's a size thing as well. I don't think Ryzen have a big pool
Right,
of
that's true.
fighters. Yeah, but I think one thing they could do is do him and Satoshi, but don't tell him that there's grappling involved, and just let him think it's a boxing match, and then Satoshi can just submit him or something. That would be
That
cool.
reminds me when the Mikuru versus Floyd exhibition first got announced,
Yeah,
there was some sort of part of the announcement where it was like they are going to fight and the rules will be announced at some point. And I'm like, yeah, okay, like
yeah,
you're not fooling me here. Like I think you did the same thing with the tension fight too, where you're like, it's we don't know the rules yet.
yeah.
Um, and my favorite thing was at the Hawaii press conference with Mayweather and Mikuru. Mikuru had MMA gloves with him, and he was like, Floyd, if you think you can take me on easily, you should fight me in MMA gloves. To which
Yeah.
Floyd was immediately like, no, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, no thanks.
he immediately like put on the pressure of like, yeah, I'm the A side in this. Like I can just not fight if I want.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, so yeah, that was the sort of the weird part about the show, but there's a lot of much more serious fights that we can get to
Yeah,
on this
like the
Ryzen
Jizzy
38
fight.
card.
Just
Well,
kidding.
yeah, we'll talk about that in a moment. But actually, one thing I find really interesting is that we got this sort of super Ryzen freak show fights in the afternoon, but after that, Ryzen 38, it was a 7 pack of pretty good matchups. Like these were
Yeah.
serious matchups where the skill levels were pretty balanced, and there was some really good fights. You're the person who covered a story on Park Si-woo, so I feel like we have to start there. And I feel like she, on this Ryzen 38 card, was the absolute star of it. Um, she won in her Super Atomweight Grand Prix semifinal fight, defeating Ayaka Hamasaki in what was a stellar 3-round striking performance. What did you make of this?
I, as you know, I'm a massive Suwoo Park fan, and obviously, thank you for plugging what I wrote about. I It was a lot better than I thought it would be. I predicted that Suwoo Park would win purely because I felt that I love Ayaka Hamasaki. She's one of my favorite fighters of all time, male or female, Japan or the US. Like she is right up there with my all-time favorites. I think at this point in her career, she's starting to fade a little. And we started to see it. I mean, I thought she was brilliant against Seikaizawa in the second fight. I think her gas tank held up. But it's the striking bouts that she'd had previously, even like the Jessica Aguilar fight. There was a period where she started to fade a little towards the end. And I just thought Siwoo Park's best traits are she's a massive cardio bully. She can go all 15 minutes, and we've seen her fight people, and keep up that pace from start to finish. What I wrote about personally was Siwoo Park's kind of defensive capabilities. A lot of her best work offensively is built off what she does defensively, right? So
Mhm.
it's a lot of stuff in takedowns. It's a lot of when she gets taken down, just spamming up kicks. There's not a lot of technique to the way she gets back to her feet. It's a lot of just whacking people with up kicks. And I think that once Ayaka Hamasaki felt those up kicks, she never really returned back to the grappling. And every time she tried to go for the single leg, Siwoo Park was just moving side to side, lateral movement, just really kind of basic fundamentals of what I called like sprawl and brawl, which is like a classic MMA term. But I think she's kind of bringing that back. It's not a style that many fighters have nowadays because people have evolved a lot more. But I think that because she was so defensively sound, she was always going to perform quite well against Ayaka Hamasaki. But what I wasn't prepared for was Ayaka to really, in my opinion, barely have any success in the fight. I mean, Siwoo Park from pillar to post beat her, dropped her in the third round as well. I thought she fought amazingly. I really can't wait for the final of the Grand Prix.
Now, there's two ways to look at this matchup, and I'm interested which way you view it more favorably in. There's the take that Park had an amazing performance and she's undervalued, and this was a testament to that. But there's also the take that Hamasaki is regressing, and this fight was sort of a wake-up call that she is in a bad point right now.
Yeah,
I would personally say it's somewhere like I would personally credit this fight more towards Park's skill set and how she is an undervalued fighter, but I'm interested, which where on that sort of spectrum would you place this fight between those two different opinions?
I think the matchup was a favorable one for Siwoo Park. Whether people realized it or not beforehand, we certainly saw that after the fact. I think Ayaka Hamasaki is regressing, which is sad to say. I wrote about it. I don't have the facts off the top of my head, but I mean, apart from the Kana fight, Ayaka hasn't beaten anyone under the age of like 37 in a while. Like it's she's performing well against her peers and against her contemporaries. She's beaten Jessica Aguilar, and I guess once she starts to take on these younger fighters, and Siwoo Park's 31, it's not like she's young like Seiko Izawa, but she's still got a lot of her career ahead of her. I love Ayaka Hamasaki to bits. The Grand Prix was always going to be a stretch for her. She was never going to fight Renner, only because obviously they're teammates. I doubt that RIZIN would make that happen. So she was always going to bump into either Seika again or Siwoo Park, and this was inevitably going to happen. So I think you're right in saying that there is some regression there for Ayaka Hamasaki. I think there's also a lot of brilliance on Siwoo Park's side, But genuinely, like you said, I think it's down the middle. I think it's a lot of Ayaka is regressing, yes, and I think Siwoo Park had a favorable matchup. She also performed a lot better than I thought she would. So I think credit where it's due.
Yeah, and I guess it's worth saying that even if Hamasaki is regressing skill set wise, she's still one of the better fighters in the division. It's not like
Yeah,
there's this sudden plateau where she's like at the very bottom. Like there's she faced a very talented opponent in Park in this matchup. It just turns out that Park put on really one of the better performances of her career.
yeah,
So she's going to go on into the finals and face Seika Izawa. I want to talk about that fight real quick. There's two things. I have to really give credit to both fighters here. So for anyone who missed it, Seika Izawa picked up a submission win against Anastasia Svetkivska. Svetkivska was coming in on short notice to replace Reina, who had a orbital bone injury and had to get forced out of the semifinals. She lost in the quarterfinals to Reina. So this was also like she was getting the quick turnaround that everybody else in this bracket was as well. Svetkivska, she lost this fight, but she put up a very good performance against Izawa. She gave her a lot of trouble in the first round, and I feel like she sort of forced a better Izawa out of this fight. That in the sense that Izawa in the first round was certainly a different fighter in the second round, and I guess that's where I start giving credit to Izawa in this fight. That the performance that Izawa put on in the second round of this bout was incredible. She turned into this grappling machine. It was just this constant, submission attempt after attempt after attempt after attempt. And it almost was 5 complete minutes of her just going for one thing after another until she secured an armbar to end the fight. So I really have to give credit to both fighters here that Svetkivska entered this fight on short notice against the best fighter in the division, put up a really good fight, and brought a better fight out of Izawa, or a closer fight out of Izawa than I expected. But also I have to give credit to Izawa for really turning it on and getting this finish in the second round and turning things around. I feel like she really studied that first round and realized, okay, this is what I have to do in the second round, and then went out there and did exactly that. What do you think?
yeah. I'm in total agreement. I was really impressed with Svetkivska, and I feel bad for her because she performed so well against Renna, lost that fight. Obviously, she was still in the bracket because Renna pulled out due to injury. I was really impressed how she did against Renna, and then against Seika Izawa in the first round, there were moments there where I thought Seika might lose, and I felt that against Lara Fontoura as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think what kind of struck me after those fights, and having followed Izawa for a while, and I guess in a moment, I guess we can talk about the Siwoo Park and Izawa matchup if we have time. But
yes.
I think with Izawa, it's not so much that she's this flawless, crazy, incredible talent, which she is that, but it's her invincibility. Like there's sorry, not her invincibility. It's her ability to face adversity, right? Every time she kind of gets hit or she looks like she's about to get submitted, something just clicks in her and she just finds a way to win fights. When she fought Siwoo Park back in Deep, she fought Siwoo Park with one eye swollen shut for 2 rounds and managed to win that fight. Against Lara Fontoura had her neck in a guillotine for what felt like 3, maybe more, like 3 or so minutes, perhaps, of Fontoura just having her in a guillotine. This fight as well, Svetkivska was threatening with a few submissions, dealing some damage from the bottom, a lot of elbows. There's just something about her. I like. There's, and I know she gets compared a lot to Sakuraba, and I can totally see it because there's that ability to kind of absorb punishment and then turn it around and somehow win fights is crazy. She's still so young. She's incredible. I was blown away by the way she performed in that second round when she, managed to get the fight. She went on her back and managed to get submission. It was outstanding, to be honest. I was blown away.
Yeah, something like that round. I need to watch it back because to me it was just incredible how she has turned into a different fighter. Just that there was so many attempts, and I just don't know how anyone could deal with that without falling behind her pace and getting caught in something eventually.
Yeah.
So that was really an incredible performance, and really one of the many incredible performances she has put on now. Just like you said, you referenced her previous fight with Park. They're having another fight on New Year's Eve this year. They have a history. they have a direct history, and there's also some storytelling here in the background. I find this is a really great matchup. This is, um, th as you said, they fought before, but the main thing that I think about this fight is that this fight is a testament to the generation that Deep Jewels is developing right now,
Yeah,
in the atom weight division. You said Park, she's in her 30s. She's not, this incredibly young athlete, but I would group her in that, new generation of super atom weight where, similar to Izawa, they're on the come up. They're beating a lot of these experienced names that we've seen in RIZIN for a few years now, and they are kind of, well, at least in Izawa's case, certainly cementing themselves at the very top of the division. I would say the work that Deep Jewels has done over the past few years at super atom weight, or at atom weight in general, has really crafted this fight on New Year's Eve.
yeah, I'm in total agreement, and it's great that you bring that up because I think while Siwoo Park is 31, she's only actually had 13 fights, so she's
Yes.
only had 5 more than Seika Izawa. So I think grouping them is fair. Right there with like Saori Oshima, for example,
Hmm.
they're all coming up together, and they're really. I think Deep did an amazing job during the pandemic, actually building this roster, and we're kind of a bit away from that, and RIZIN have more foreign fighters and all of that, but I think people forget that there was a period where RIZIN didn't really have much during the pandemic, and they were just taking fighters from Deep, and they were taking fighters from Heat, and all of these other Japanese promotions. And now it's starting to pay dividends because suddenly you don't have Ayaka Hamasaki here, you don't have Kana Sakura, you don't have your RIZIN super atom weights. You have 2 Deep Jewels veterans, even though they're both young in their careers, 2 Deep Jewels veterans fighting for that Grand Prix crown. And I think just to talk a bit about this fight, I'm super excited because in their first fight, Siwoo Park fought so well defensively that Seika Izawa was forced to kind of strike for 15 minutes. A lot of her grappling was inefficient, and that's really exciting ahead of their fight. And Izawa's developed a lot, and so has Siwoo Park. I think, like we spoke about when we first did the show a few months back for the opening round of the Grand Prix, Seika Izawa is a superstar already, and she's going to be a special fighter. If she beats Siwoo Park, having the belt and then having the Grand Prix crown, I don't know what else there's left for her in Japan after this.
It's almost funny to me that Izawa has fought numerous times in RIZIN now, and she's a very familiar name to all of us.
Yeah,
And she is cementing herself as this top name in the division. But she only debuted in October 2020. She is most definitely a pandemic success story.
absolutely.
I find it so interesting to me. But if she has that crowning moment on New Year's Eve, it's going to be incredible. It's going to be a big moment for her career. But it won't be without a hard fight against Park, who most definitely in 2021 gave her that hard fight. And um, you know, it is nothing to look past in this matchup.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot more competitive than people realize.
Hmm. Now, before we move past this event, quick few more things. Road FC champion Kim Soo-chol picked up
Yes.
a massive win, defeating Hiromasa Ogikubo. There was, some differing opinions on this fight. Some people thought that Ogikubo didn't look as good as they expected. I personally was just really amazed by how Kim performed. What was your opinion on this?
Kim was unbelievable. I think I don't even think Ogikubo was that bad. I just think Kim did an amazing job at stifling everything that Ogikubo is great at, which is there was a lot of anti-grappling. There was a lot of offensive grappling as well from Kim, which won him a few exchanges. But on the feet, he was just unbelievable. There were periods the fight was actually a lot closer than people give credit to Ogikubo. I thought that although Kim made him look quite bad and actually exposed a lot of the stuff that Ogikubo isn't great at, there were moments, especially in the third round, and I know RIZIN doesn't score by rounds and they score the fight as a whole, but there was a period in the third round where Ogikubo kind of started to land a bit more frequency, managed to get the takedown going. It was too little too late though, and Kim I thought was just unreal. He,
Hmm.
for me, was one of the MVPs of the night. For me, it goes to Siwoo Park, but if I had to pick someone else, it would definitely be Kim. And man, immediately this guy is a contender for whatever RIZIN want to do at the top of that weight class. I know he's only had one fight, but he's just one of those guys that you could throw him in, you know?
Yeah, well, he comes in with such a strong resume too that I think I mentioned it in an article that he's lost once over the past decade. So,
Yeah.
he's the stellar fighter, and I can't really take much away from Ogi Kubo for losing this fight because even though this is someone who isn't too familiar to Rise and he only fought in the promotion once back in like 2017 or something like that. Even
Yeah.
though he isn't that familiar to the promotion, he's most certainly a very strong fighter. Um, so yeah, I think this was just a matchup of two really good bantamweights, and Ogi Kubo, he's still in the mix. Um, but Kim, he's certainly one of the top names if they're going to keep him around, which I would only imagine they would. You said something about how they need to do something with him with whatever they're doing at the top of the division. I have zero clue what they're doing with this
Yeah.
division right now because Kyoji Horiguchi is still the champion, but he's a Bellator fighter.
Mhm.
He fought this on this card. He beat Kintaro, but that wasn't for the title fight, so he hasn't defended his belt ever. He won it in late 2020. He's never defended his
Yeah.
belt ever.
Yeah.
So it's very confusing what they're doing here. Um, I joked before that the issue is that he, they decided to keep him as champion when he signed with Bellator in 2021. So now that it's been more than a year since then, it almost feels like you can't take the belt away because you've sort of committed to a decision here.
Yeah, exactly.
Like it almost feels weird to now say that you're gonna take the belt because it's like, okay, well, you were okay with it for more than a year, and now you're
Yeah.
just deciding that it's all of a sudden he can't be the champion. I maybe he'll return later this year, but um his performance against Kentaro, I honestly actually don't have much to say about it because like that was just sort of the expected outcome.
Yeah, it really was. I don't think Kentaro is a great fighter. He has a lot of good traits, and we saw him actually clip Horiguchi. A lot was made on the English broadcast that Horiguchi was midair and he might have been caught off guard. I genuinely just think that Kintaro clipped him pretty well and
Mm.
Horiguchi was dropped. I think at that point something switched in Horiguchi's mind and he was like, "Hey, maybe I'll just wrestle this guy who clearly doesn't know how to defend takedowns." And then it worked, and suddenly, Horiguchi looked amazing. And I tweeted this after the event. Seeing Horiguchi smile makes me smile. But there's just he's such a, I don't know, that there's just a unique quality to him, and I can understand why RIZIN want to have him once a year. Not only is he probably the best Japanese fighter in the world, maybe we'll be talking about Izawa in that mix a year from now, but I think for right now, Horiguchi is definitely the most decorated and best Japanese fighter in the world. It makes sense having him back every year. But like you say, if there's no belt being defended, it's really weird. One thing that I've been waiting on is Naoki Inoue. Like when is Inoue fighting?
Mm.
Should he be fighting Horiguchi? Should he be fighting Kim? That's a potential matchup for either guy. I think if you did him and Horiguchi, you could potentially have a title match there. In my opinion, I know Inoue lost to Ogi Kubo in the Grand Prix, but in my opinion, if I had to pick the three best Japanese fighters, it's Horiguchi, it's Izawa, and it's Inoue. And if that's
Wow.
controversial, I'm sorry, but those, for my money, those are the three most talented and best fighters that Japan has to offer. And I think if you did Horiguchi and Inoue for the belt, or if you did Kim and Inoue for number one contender or something, those are the fights I'd want to see out of these two that we've just mentioned.
All right, so before we talk about upcoming fights, is there any other takeaways from these two cards that you want to quickly mention?
The only takeaway is, well, I have two. One, Luis Gustavo is amazing, and I love watching him fight. The guy just throws caution to the wind, and I don't know if he's very good, and we've been watching him for a few years. I don't know if he's a good fighter, but he can hit very hard, and that's very dangerous. Yuri Ohara's awesome, but it was kind of consensus that Gustavo would knock him out. He did his job. Maybe we see Gustavo in the lightweight Grand Prix that was announced for Bellator. Potentially, there could be some crossover there. If they don't do Satoshi, maybe put Luis Gustavo in there. I don't know. The only other thing I wanted to say is Kyohei Hagiwara. God damn, man, learn to grapple, please. Getting submitted by a kickboxer is very weird. It's strange.
I was gonna mention that.
Yeah,
he was facing a kickboxer.
Yeah, it's so weird, man. Like he's a very good striker and he hits hard and there's a lot of technique behind what he does. But the minute he gets taken down, it's it's like he just gives up. And he did some good stuff actually in the first round defending it, but I don't know, getting submitted by Chihiro Suzuki is just a weird look. I don't know what else is left for Hagiwara. One of the MVPs of the RIZIN pandemic thing, and he's fought quite a lot in the last. I don't know, maybe if he took a year off and worked on his grappling. I don't know how much he cares to do that, though. That's the only thing. But he's
I
now
don't know how
6 and
much you can
7.
sharpen your tools if you stay at Smoker Gym.
Yeah, well, that's has to be one of the greatest gyms probably in the world.
Oh, absolutely. If it even is a gym, I don't even know.
Yeah, they're just smoking.
Yeah, yeah, and what's frustrating is that Hagiwara had a lot of hard fights recently where he was like in lopsided matchups that he had really no chance of winning.
He rocked Kleber. We
Yeah,
forget that
but
he almost
he
beat
should have
Kleber.
never been in there with Kleber though.
Yeah, exactly.
But this was one of those fights where he had a chance. Like this was a really good matchup in my opinion, and he lost it. So I just don't know where you go with him with a negative record of 6 wins and 7 losses. But I mean, I can only imagine he's going to be back.
Yeah.
He'll
be back next month, dude. Like he'll be fighting some random person. Like
he might be facing Koiki again.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was that, and then regarding Gustavo, I think it's interesting. I think what happens with him depends on what they're gonna do with Souza on New Year's Eve. Like I'm assuming for the past few weeks in my column, I've been like very confidently assuming that Souza is gonna return on New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
Just because they're not gonna book him on Landmark and they're not gonna book him on 39, which is next month. And he hasn't fought since like April, so New Year's Eve would make sense for him. I would be okay with giving Gustavo that title shot next.
100%.
But if that's not going to happen, then yeah, throw him into the Bellator Grand Prix. I don't know if Bellator wants to borrow a fighter for that, but I think
how big the bracket is, though, right?
Like I was gonna say, like their lightweight division isn't that big.
Yeah, and they've got there's a lot of good stuff at the top. If they're going to take like 16 fighters, the thing that annoys me is if you're going to collaborate as two promotions, can you please do more? Like last time we spoke, I literally said the absolute crux of this deal that RIZIN and Bellator have can't just be Spike Carlisle and maybe Horiguchi fights in RIZIN once a year. There has to be more, right? Take Luis Gustavo, please, because I'd love to see him fight some fighters in Bellator. That would be amazing.
Yeah, and I would say that if there's one thing that sort of confused me about this deal is not to be like rude, but I don't really know what Bellator gets out of it, because
yes,
RIZIN borrows a lot of their fighters, but they don't really borrow a lot of RIZIN's fighters. And there should be some sort of trade-off where it feels like a 50-50 deal. Right now, it feels like an 80-20 deal.
Definitely. I think Bellator just have it so they can go to Japan once a year, and it's probably easier.
But we don't even know if that's going to happen this year. We haven't heard anything yet. I asked RIZIN's matchmaker Shingo Kashiwagi in an interview about that, and he gave a very diplomatic answer.
I listened to that. Yeah,
in all fairness, he did say that's not really a question for him to answer, but the answer that I got did not give any leads to something necessarily happening this year. Not to say that it won't happen, but I wasn't given any tea leaves to read regarding that. So if we can just quickly talk about some of the upcoming fights. RIZIN 39 is on October 23rd. There's a few fights on here, but the only one I really care about mentioning is the main event. Featherweight champion Juntaro Ushiku is facing Kleber Koiki. This is a fight that you and me have both been saying has needed to happen for months now. I mean, there was really, at this point, there was no justifying not giving him the title fight.
Yeah.
Because for Koiki, there really is nothing else for him to do except this title fight. So that should be a good matchup. What do you think?
I'm really excited for that fight, only because it gives Kleber or Koiki, however which way we want to call the man's name. He's amazing, and it's baffling to me. I said the minute he submitted Mikuru Sakura, he should have fought for the belt. I don't know why we had to do the Oka Sasaki fight. I don't know why. God knows why we had to do the Kyohei Hagiwara fight. And though he did face some adversity, he ended up submitting Hagiwara. It's now 5 submissions in a row for Kleber in RIZIN. I'm super excited for this fight. Ushiku's a weird one. I've watched Ushiku for a few years. I still don't know what he's good at. If that's and I know that sounds horrible, but I there's just nothing about him. He's just a jack of all trades kind of fighter, and I honestly just think he's keeping the belt warm for Kleber at this point. I don't have much to say other than Kleber probably submits him in a round, maybe 2 rounds if Ushiku makes it dangerous. I think there are things that Ushiku could do in the striking department. You know, if Hagiwara managed to hurt Kleber, then maybe Ushiku can too. But I really just think that at this point we're just killing time until Kleber is champ. And I think RIZIN have really missed the trick, man. Like they should have, for the longest time now, it should have been Kleber champ and Satoshi champ, and you do a card of the two of them as champions and you promote it. I actually collect Gong magazine, for example. I've been collecting Gong for years, and there's like issues in the last few months. The back of every page or like the cover of every magazine is it's Satoshi and Kleber, Satoshi and Kleber, Satoshi and Kleber. Why have we waited this long to do this? But finally it's going to happen, and I think he's going to wipe the floor of Ushiku. No disrespect to Ushiku, but I think it's about damn time for Kleber.
I find it interesting. This card, it's probably going to be a weak card, and I think it just comes down to the logistics of New Year's Eve is around the corner, and I think that at this point there is lots of keepaways where, you know, fighters, they don't want to fight right now because their health would be uncertain for New Year's Eve if they competed this soon.
Yeah.
So I think that card's gonna be kind of weak overall, but I think that, you know, that's a pretty solid main event to give a show.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just being able to put a belt just before all of the craziness of New Year's Eve, it's nice to just, we've not really had a proper title match for a while, so that's kind of nice. Also on this card, before we segue, Vugar Karamov, who last time we spoke I said might be one of RIZIN's best fighters, if not the best. I still believe that, but Yoshiki Nakahara is a beast, and I cannot wait for that fight. I think that fight's going to be amazing.
Yeah, that's good matchmaking. I mean, this show has some questionable matchups. Koji Takeda facing Zach Zane, who's on like a 5-fight losing streak, being one of them, notably. Motsunobu Tezuka facing a fighter from Azerbaijan who has a 5-5 record. I don't know what's going on there either.
A friend of Karamov, I would say.
Probably. But this Karamov Nakahara fight, it's a fight, you know? Like, that's the type of matchup that you want for someone like Karamov to sort of really prove that he's one of the better names at featherweight. So that's gonna be a good matchup. Just before we get out of here, one thing, just a couple days ago, RIZIN Landmark, the next Landmark card was announced. It's gonna be on November 6th at the Dolphins Arena. So just one thing before we get into these matchups. So RIZIN has Kill the Trigger series. The main, I think the rundown of this is that the main sponsor of that series is in legal troubles right now, and that company's probably like not operating. And I think that the contractual, and this is speculation here, but like an educated guess, I would imagine the contractual situation is that you can't run a Trigger series without using that sponsor in the title, but the sponsor, like, you can't use that sponsor also right now because they're like in huge trouble. So I guess instead of doing the Trigger series, they've killed Trigger, and now Landmark is basically Trigger. So this is going to be in a cage. It's going to be a significantly longer show than what Landmarks were. Landmarks were like 4 or 5 fights at most. So really, I'm calling it a Landmark show, but if it helps for anyone who's listening, just think of this as a Trigger show. So there's 12 fights. It's gonna be headlined by Satoshi Yamasu and Ren Hiramoto. Very hard fight for Ren, who is still fighting to even his pro record. But overall, you know, I was really surprised because I didn't know this was going to be the new Trigger. This was only announced this week. I was surprised to wake up and see that like 11 fights got announced, but we have a full card here. And quite honestly, this is at least if we're judging this as the second tier of RIZIN events, this is a good card.
Yeah, I love this card. There's so many fighters here that Kazuma Kuramoto is one of my favorite fighters, and we can get into it, but genuinely, like, this is a pretty damn good RIZIN card. If they put a number next to this and maybe didn't have Satoshi Yamasu and Ren Hiramoto, maybe if this was the card for Kleber and Ushiku, it would be one of my favorite cards of the year. No joke.
Yeah, and just a few names that stick out to me. I think one that is kind of underrated on this card is Road FC talent Yang Ji-young, who's facing Full Swing. You know, he was supposed to face Kai Asakura on that show a few months ago, and then Asakura dropped out of the show, and he still fought, and he put on a good performance. He's an undefeated prospect, so I think he's, in my opinion, one to watch if you're like a prospect person. Um, Yuki Motoya versus Kazuma Kuramoto, as you mentioned, that's a really good matchup, and Kuramoto keeps getting these really hard fights, but I do think this is one where he has a pretty solid chance of winning. It's two really good fighters.
Yeah.
Um, Samurai Mark Hunt is back.
Oh, dude. Yes. Hell yeah. And Minoa Man, please. This is the best fight of the year, in my opinion.
I'm not a big fan of Minoa Man still fighting. Not to be like the lame-o because he's old and
Yeah.
stuff like that. I know it's lame to say that. More than anything, I just want to name drop Samurai Mark Hunt.
Oh, great.
I liked the people on Twitter who were just learning about this fighter for the first time. People who weren't watching RIZIN 12 back in like 2017 or whatever it was. But that's okay. I think that RIZIN 12 was a completely skippable show. So
dude, 100%.
especially if you're a Yusuke Yachi fan.
Yeah.
we're getting Kalyu Gibrain already back, even though he lost like 6 days ago.
Very weird. Yeah.
Yeah, but he's probably gonna win that match because he's facing Taka Kenshin. Yeah, so he lost his debut, former sumo fighter, lost his debut earlier this year in kind of like a murderous fashion. And so I'm kind of worried about how that will go. But yeah, overall, there's lots of flyweight Takaki Soya, he's on this card. He's facing Yusaku Nakamura. That's going to be a really good matchup. Soya, he's incredibly underrated in part because he was gone for 2 years. He was battling Crohn's disease and he couldn't fight. So he was just off the radar.
Yeah.
But
his wife pass away as well?
Yes. Yeah. So he's really had a tough life recently. But the thing is about him is that he is incredibly underrated because he had 2 finish wins in RIZIN before his long absence. And he came back earlier this year and scored another finish win. So he is not someone to underrate. And I think his performance on this card could be one of the ones that stick out.
I agree. Just real quick on Minoa Man, that's fight number 118 for Minoa Man.
Yeah, count. That's pretty insane.
Also, Imanari's fighting on this card, which is cool. Anytime Imanari fights is a good time.
Unless you're someone who's facing Imanari.
Absolutely, yeah.
One more thing before we go. I just want to talk about this main event. I mean, what do you think about Hiromoto facing Yamasu?
I have zero interest in Ren Hiromoto as an MMA fighter.
Oh no!
Yeah, do you know what I loved was him following Mayweather around all week. That was really hilarious to me. I even tweeted that, it wouldn't surprise me if when the national anthem of the United States of America was playing, if the camera just panned to Ren Hiromoto just crying with like his hand over his chest or something. He was really kind of getting into the whole I'm in Mayweather's camp. I don't know if you saw the video of him laughing at Mikuru as well, like cage side.
Yeah,
that was pretty funny. Anyways, completely sidetracked. Satoshi Yamasu is awesome. Part-time fighter, part-time salary man, full-time badass. He's a glutton for punishment. He gets knocked out sometimes, but a lot of the time he absorbs quite a bit and kind of keeps going. Way better grappler than Ren Hiromoto could ever be or will ever be. I think he's going to take Hiromoto to the ground. He's going to submit him, or he's going to ground and pound. Something will happen. Ren Hiromoto got submitted by Aguiar. I have nothing else to say.
Yeah, I mean, it would be cool if Ren shocked us here, but I do think the issue is that they have paired someone against Ren once again who has a solid ground game. Yeah. And I just don't think you can do that. Like you can't match him against someone who has a solid ground game because they know they have a solid ground game and they're going to use that to win. And I'm not saying you should book fights specifically for one person to win, but I'm saying you shouldn't book fights where someone basically has no chance of winning. And that's kind of what Hiromoto's in here now.
Dude,
and
they should just send Ren to Bellator because in Japan, you're not going to find many fighters who aren't good on the ground. Wrestling is huge in Japan. Judo is huge in Japan. Jiu-jitsu is huge in Japan. You're going to find people who are going to take you to the ground, even if they suck as MMA fighters. Ren needs someone who's just going to stand there and trade with him, like the Chihiro Suzuki fight. That was kind of what Ren should be doing. I don't know. It's weird to me. It's just a lamb to the slaughter, but it is what it is, man.
Yeah, and I guess that I mean, we'll see how it goes, but
yeah,
I don't feel good about this. The second it got announced, I was just like, hands on my head, what are you doing?
Yeah.
But apart from that matchup, I think there's some really nice bouts on that card, and it could even be better than the RIZIN 39, which happens about a week before it.
Yep.
So that's all we have for today. Thank you to everyone who listens to the JMMA Monday audio podcast. Thank you for sticking with us despite our long absence and only being in article format for a while. Before we get out of here, Christopher, what plugs do you have? It's great to have you again on here. Please let people know where they can find you.
Awesome. Well, firstly, man, I really appreciate you having me back. I love the show and I love getting to talk RIZIN with you. People can find me at Aguiar MMA, Aguiar MMA, on Twitter, on Instagram, .com at the end of that if you want to go on my website. Quick thing to plug, Badr Hari and Alistair Overeem are fighting this weekend. When you hear this, I will be writing kind of like a retrospective thing about their trilogy. So if you're interested in kickboxing, and they have a lot of history and a lot of K1 history. So if you're into the whole Japanese combat sports scene, keep your eyes peeled for that. That's all I have to plug.
Yeah, and if there's one thing that you guys should look out for in his work, it's that he is always winding back the clock and looking at historical things. There's so much work in MMA writing, which is all about the now, and it's all about what's coming up. But not enough people are doing the retrospectives and the looking backs and the reflecting that Christopher is doing. So I think that his work in that sense is very unique, and it's something that people should definitely check out. Before I get out of here, you can follow me on Twitter at JackWannan. That's JackWannan. Knockdownnews.com is where you can find other work from this website, or you can follow the site on Twitter at Knockdown News to get updates on whenever any more articles or updates or whatever comes out. All right, well, that wraps up the episode. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.